Alright, today we are going to get started into chapter 11. Now, chapter 11 talks about quadratic equations, inequalities, and functions. Now, the first thing, of course, we want to talk about is what is a quadratic equation. And then after that, we will talk about how to solve the quadratic equation using the square root property. So let's see what a quadratic equation is. Now, a quadratic equation is any equation that can be written in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where your values a, b, and c are real numbers and a cannot be 0. And any equation, as I said, in this form is called a quadratic equation. Now, this form that is given here, the ax squared plus bx plus c, is what we like to call as the standard form. Okay? So anytime you see a quadratic equation in this form, we say it's in the standard form. Now, a quadratic equation is basically a second degree equation. By second degree, of course, we mean that the highest power in your equation has to be a squared term or has to have the exponent 2 on it. So that's what we call as a second degree equation. And you cannot have anything higher than a second degree. And of course, you can look at examples here. We have 4x squared plus 10x minus 2 equals 0. You can also have it in this form, which is 3n squared equals 2n minus 5. And this is a good example. As you can see, this is not in the standard form, since your squared term is on one side of the equal to sign and the other two terms are on the other side. Alright, so what we are going to do in this chapter is basically see how to solve these equations. So to do that, we need to review what we call as the zero factor property. So what exactly is the zero factor property? Now, I'm sure you have used this many times, but let's just go ahead and review it so we know what exactly we're talking about here. So the zero factor property says if you have two numbers that have a product of 0, then at least one of the numbers must be 0. So basically we are saying if you have two numbers, let's say a and b, and you're taking a product of these two numbers, it basically means that if the product is 0, then that means either a has to be 0 or b has to be 0, because 0 times something will give you 0, so we don't know which one of these two is 0. So just to review our zero factor property, let's just go ahead and look at this example here. You have 2x squared minus 3x equals -1, and we want to try solving this using the zero factor property. So the first thing that we need to do is write this in the standard form. So we will go ahead and bring our 1 over to the left hand side so that every term is on the same side, and this will end up giving you 2x squared minus 3x. When you bring the -1 on this side, you add 1 and you will end up with a 0 on the other side. Now this is your equation in the standard form. To solve this, you will have to go ahead and factor your left hand side. Okay, so let's see what happens when we try to factor our expression here. And you should end up with, when you're trying to factor, okay, this will factor out into 2x minus 1 and x minus 1. Okay, again, we talked about factoring in chapter 6, so if you're not sure how to do this, go back and look at how to work with factoring. But basically we go ahead and write this term into its factors, which will be 2x minus 1 and x minus 1. So basically what we have done is written our expression in this form: a times b equals 0. So a being the first factor, b being the second factor. Now by zero factor property, we're saying either the first term equals 0 or the second term equals 0. So that's the exact same thing we will do here. We will say that either 2x minus 1 equals 0 or x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, solve each one of these equations here and try and see what values for x do we come up with. And that should give you, start by taking the 1 over to the other side. Then we divide both sides by 2, so we can get x by itself. And you end up with x equals 1/2. On the other side, you take the 1 over to the other side and you end up with x equals 1. So basically we are saying that the solution to the original equation, which was 2x squared minus 3x equals -1, the solution to this equation will be x equals 1/2 or x equals 1. So of course you will go ahead and write this as a solution set that contains two values, 1/2 and 1. Okay. Now again, if you like to, you can go back and check your answer, put it back into the original equation, which was 2x squared minus 3x equals -1. We'll go ahead and check for x equals 1 first. So that will give you 1 squared minus 3 times 1 equals -1. And that will give you 2 minus 3. And 2 minus 3, of course, gives you -1. So you end up with a true statement there. So we know that x equals 1 is indeed a solution. Now let's go ahead and check for x equals 1/2. And again, that will be 2 times 1/2 squared minus 3 times 1/2 equals -1. 2 times 1/2 squared will give you 2 over 4. 3 times 1/2 will give you 3 over 2. And if you go and find a common denominator and try and subtract these two values, you will end up with 2/4 minus 6/4, because again you will multiply this expression by 2, so that both the denominators will be 4. And that will give you -4 over 4, which equals -1. So you can see you end up with -1 and -1 on both sides. So again you end up with a true statement here. And you can see that both of these solutions, x equals 1 and x equals 1/2, satisfy our original equation. Okay? So this is what we will be using to help us solve these quadratic equations here.